Gentlemen, you know I'm always talking about that I'm big pretty, that I live my life large and in charge. Well, today I thought I'd talk about some other big pretty men who lived their lives large and in charge and became legends. My top 10 list of big famous men. Today on Big Pretty Man. Welcome back to Big Pretty Man, the channel for the extra large man who wants to live his life large and in charge. I'm your host, Timothy Big Pretty Crowe. I'm a wardrobe and lifestyle consultant for the extra large man. Okay, guys, you know, whenever we think about the famous men in history, whether it be in politics or on stage and screen, we usually think of these dashing leading men types, these, you know, these very chiseled, beautiful, beautiful men in both world of politics and then the world of, in the world of stars. But rarely do we think about the contributions of larger-bodied men. So therefore, I thought that I would take this opportunity to give you my list of the top 10 famous big men. Now, a couple of criteria I had for this list was that these men had to have been large at the time that they became famous. You know, a lot of actors especially will start off very young, physically fit, and dashing, and then as they get older, you know, they kind of blow up. But for this list, I wanted ones that became famous while they were heavy. Therefore, I'd like to give special acknowledgement to two particular actors. One, the legendary Marlon Brando, considered one of America's greatest actors, and a man who, when he was younger, he was, you know, quite fit and quite a handsome, dashing man. But as he got older, he was still handsome, but he blew up physically. Another one would be the legendary Orson Welles. Orson Welles, you know, he was actually a heavyset man most of his later life, but when he started off, he was quite a thin guy. So special notice to those two guys, and it really hurt me not to put them on the list, but I had to stick to my rules. Okay, the other thing I want to mention is, because I am covering 10 of these men and give them proper time, this will be a two-part video. This will be part one, where I'll do the first 5, I'll do the second 5 in another video. Okay, so let's start off this list with a bit of comedy, with a young man who was just a energy ball of hilarity. Of course, I'm talking about Chris Farley. Chris Farley was just a brilliant comedian and a brilliant physical comedian. You know, when he came on stage, he was hilarious, and he just seemed like he was just ready to explode at any moment. There was just so much that he just come right at you, and you couldn't help but adore him. Of course, Chris started off in Chicago's Second City, the same comedy troupe by which a lot of the comedians have come out of the last 40 years. And of course, but he became almost overnight famous when he joined the cast of Saturday Night Live from 1990 to 1995. You know, Chris's routines always usually had over-the-top big characters. Probably his most famous is Matt Foley, the inspirational speaker who you find out was living in a van down by the river. Still cracks me up. You know, he went on, you know, and probably what really launched him in Saturday Night Live was that famous bit of him being a Chippendale dancer, competing with Patrick Swayze. And as big a guy as he was, with all the flab, he knew all the moves. Guy could dance. And it just shows just how confident he was with his body, at least in a comic sense. He went on, of course, to make some pretty famous movies. Probably his best known was Tommy Boy, which I still think is a classic. And he made Black Sheep and you know, and Beverly Hills Ninja. Though I think that, you know, he kind of his best work was in Tommy Boy. Unfortunately, like a lot of big comedians and big who live big and large and over the top, he succumbed to addictions to drugs and alcohol and ended up dying in 1997 from an overdose of cocaine and morphine. It's just such a waste at the very young age of 33. Yeah. Now, number 9 on my list was actually a gentleman who Chris Farley looked up to and tried to emulate, and actually emulated him a little too closely. And of course, I'm talking about the brilliant John Belushi. John Belushi was, like Chris, was also a member of Chicago's Second City, and he also was one of the original Not Ready for Primetime players on the original cast for Saturday Night Live, where he stayed for 4 years. And during that time, he helped make that show launch, especially with his famous bits like as the Bee-Man, and also as the Samurai, and imitating Henry Kissinger. That was another great one. Marlon Brando, and also his singing and athletic abilities. Like Chris Farley, John Belushi seemed like an unstoppable tank and just an explosion of energy, and was so light on his feet. You know, the guy could jump and dance, you know, like a man 100 pounds lighter than he was. John, of course, went on to also make several famous movies. First being National Lampoon's Animal House, and then of course the iconic The Blues Brothers, based on an act that him and Dan Aykroyd came up with on Saturday Night Live. Movie is directed by John Landis. I think everyone's seen at this point. If you haven't, you really need to see it. Also, he holds the distinction of a comedy group actually having a hit song, singing Soul Man, which actually reached number 14 on the Billboard charts. You know, he also was in The Neighbors and Continental Divide, 1941. But like Chris, he succumbed once again to drugs and alcohol. This was the 70s, early 80s, and he actually died in his sleep from after being injected with a speedball, which is a combination of heroin and cocaine. So yeah, and like Chris Farley, he died at 33. So Chris emulated this hero of his a little too close. A brilliant comedian, a brilliant comedic actor. He was, losing him at both of these gentlemen at such young ages was just a real waste. Now, next on our list is another big funny man, and that would be the adorable and wonderful John Candy. John Candy, like our other two gentlemen on the list, also was a graduate of Second City, but he was from the Canadian group. He was Canadian, and he actually became famous for on the SCTV, Second City TV show in Canada, along with Eugene Levy and Martin Short and a few others went on to become famous comedians as well. John, of course, was in made a lot of films. He's probably most famous for movies like Home Alone, Uncle Buck, Spaceballs. He was in National Lampoon's Vacation. He was in The Blues Brothers with John Belushi. But one particular movie you don't hear a lot about that I actually loved him in, and that was Only the Lonely, which was a movie he starred in with Ali Sheedy, Kathleen O'Hara, and Anthony Quinn. In fact, it was Kathleen O'Hara's last movie. But what I love about this is that he actually played a romantic male lead in a romantic comedy. How many films can you name where the romantic male interest was a man plus 300 pounds? I can only think of two, and that would be Only the Lonely and Dom DeLuise's Fatso. But Only the Lonely really didn't lampoon or talk about him being a big man. He was just the guy in the movie. Never even brought up that he was a big man at all, not even once. And actually, just real quick, if you look at my video talking about how to meet women, I talk about interacting with women and that you have to be engaging. If you watch this movie, go to the scene where he initially asked Ali Sheedy out on a date. He actually handled it perfectly. He walked in very confident with a goal in mind. He established some conversation, a little bit of rapport. He actually used his sense of humor to put her at ease. And then he actually even complimented her for her working skill. Complimented her for who she was. And of course he got the date. And I'm like, that's the way it's done. And I highly recommend that movie for that reason. He did a fantastic job. And I really love that they didn't even mention that he was a big man. Just that he was the romantic lead in that. Unfortunately, we lost John Candy at a very early age in his 40s. He died in 1994 in his sleep from a heart attack. Real loss for such a talented man, and I still miss him. Still love seeing him in the old films. Now, number 7 on my list, maybe a gentleman that a lot of younger folks that may be watching my channel may have not ever heard of, unless you watch some like retro TV or classic TV, and that would be William Conrad. William Conrad was a very famous voice actor first, and was and did a lot of radio acting. In fact, it's said that in his radio career he did over 7,500 roles. That's a lot. And he had this very distinct, deep voice. And you've probably heard the voice. He actually did the opening narrations to the old Buck Rogers TV show. But he did go on into television, and he was known for 2 series. The first being Cannon, by which he was the starring role. He was a very big guy, but one thing about him in Cannon was that he was a tough dude. Big man or not, he was a tough dude. He didn't take any shit. Still love he was a hardcore private detective. He would fight in a minute. He'd put a pistol in a minute, and he was always well dressed. And he was a big guy, probably plus 300 pounds. Was quite a belly on him. Also what I loved about him was that he was always so well dressed. He's always so well put together. And he also starred in the 80s in a show called Jake and the Fat Man. Guess who the Fat Man? And once again, he's kind of also known for that voice and that sternness that he had. Actually, William Conrad lived to be 73. He actually died of a heart attack. So he for a big man, he lived to a fairly ripe age. But that voice, there'll never be a voice like William Conrad. Now, number 6 on my list is actually a gentleman that is kind of a personal role model for me, at least as far as classic menswear, and that would be the wonderful Sebastian Cabot. Unfortunately, like William Conrad, and even more so, he's someone that's been really kind of forgotten, mostly because he died fairly young, and he died back in the 70s. But he became very famous. He was an English actor, a very distinguished English actor, who became famous for the television show Family Affair, where he played the butler, Mr. French, Giles French. Everybody called him Mr. French. And he was always immaculately dressed. He became the symbol for the gentleman's gentleman, the gentleman butler. The big English chap. And of course, he became famous for wearing the bowler hat. In fact, every time I put on the bowler hat, sometimes older generation people will call me Mr. French, and I don't take it as an insult. So, but yeah, he was always immaculately dressed in almost anything that he did, and he was a big guy, probably weighed plus 300 pounds. He also had a very distinct, like Conrad, he had a very distinguished voice. His was very British. And he actually did the narration for Winnie the Pooh for Disney, and also for Disney he did the original Jungle Book. He did the character of the panther Bagheera. A great actor who unfortunately had a stroke at the age of 59. And passed away far too soon. It'd been interesting what would happen had he have lived. I think he would have went on to even greater things. But I did know one on a personal note. Whenever I watched the old Family Affair episodes, which I really hadn't seen since I was a kid, and I started watching them like about a year ago again, and I'm like, wow! I didn't realize. I think that I had subconsciously emulated him in his dress. because I was looking, you know, with his vests and his ties and the bowler hat and even his beards. I even have some of the same ties that he wore, and I'm like, wow. I think I've been emulating Mr. Fritz this whole time, and didn't realize it. But hey, if you're going to have a role model, he was a great one. He also did a wonderful episode of The Twilight Zone, and was very brave because he actually wore an all-white suit, and he's a big man. And you know what? He still looked fabulous. So, you know, if you don't know about Sebastian Cabot, definitely look up Old Family Affair and Twilight Zone, and give him a look. You'll see he was a very talented and very dapper man. Okay, guys, well, that's it for this first part of my top 10 famous big men. Be sure to tune in for part 2, where we'll go down from 5 to 1. I know you're going to want to know who I consider to be the #1 big famous man of all time. So be sure to tune back in. Until you do, you know, if you haven't already subscribed, please hit that subscription button with my pretty face. And you know, and if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me on Twitter, on Facebook, or in the comments below. And until I see you next time, be like these gentlemen in my list, and you stay pretty.